Hello everyone, it's Scott from Heroic Studios Gaming coming at you with another video. I think it's pretty obvious what I'm going to be talking about in this one. It's all right here. The Witcher comics we'll be talking about in this video. I was going to do like this dramatic pop-in, but I messed up so many times that I just kind of forgot to remove them before coming back. But anyway, let's talk about the Witcher comics as we are continuing Witcher month here at Heroic Studios Gaming. So the Witcher comics, unlike the books, are slightly different kinds of things. The books, the first two books, like I mentioned in my video on the books, are a series of short stories that are kind of related, kind of unrelated to each other, but they establish the world, and then book 3 onward create an overarching story. These guys were all published by Dark Horse Comics in conjunction with CD Projekt Red, and they're all self-contained stories. Some of them are original, some of them are original revamps of some of the untranslated stories. So some of them have like the help of Andrzej Sapkowski in that they were stories that he wrote that didn't get published in English. So they just kind of like translated them for the comics. So let's talk about them. There are 6 books that were published by Dark Horse Comics. So there's actually a few others I discovered out there, but some of them were exclusive downloads for like buying The Witcher 3, stuff that CD Projekt Red just kind of made. And so they're not really like commercially available. Like if you wanted to go out and find them, you'd probably have a harder time getting them because you have to go through like several different means. There was like Ronin, for example, was one. I don't remember all of them, but they were just these special comics that are a little bit more difficult to get a hold of. But as far as the main books, it's these 6 here, published by Dark Horse, and they had various writers. Paul Tobin wrote issues 1 through 3. Alexander Motika wrote 4, and then Bartov Stybor, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, wrote 5 and 6. He's also the same person, this guy right here, is also the same person that wrote the all of the stuff for Cyberpunk 2077. The Cyberpunk 2077 comics is this guy. He's essentially a person at CD Projekt Red who writes the comics for comic release, for game releases and stuff. So that's sort of what he does. But anyway, the first one is called House of Glass. The second is called Fox Children. Third is called Curse of Crows. Fourth is called Of Flesh and Flame. 5 is Fading Memories. And 6 is The Witch's Lament. I haven't read 6 yet. I read the other 5, and so like that's a different thing. But I have to assume that it's being a similar writer right here, that it should be relatively similar in style. So I can tell you about it a little bit. I don't know the story. Like I said, I won't cover that one because I haven't actually read it yet. I finished 5, and I wanted to make this video before I took more time to try to read 6. But essentially what you have is the stories of Geralt and stuff that he's doing. Not all of the other characters are pictured in the comics, especially in the first 2. We don't actually get anyone but Geralt, and the rest of the characters that are depicted are not characters that we've seen in the books at all, and maybe in the video games. I can't say, having not played them, but definitely not in the books or in the TV show or anything like that. And to some extent, I also felt like Paul Tobin added characters that could have been characters that were in the books, but didn't. Like, for example, in Fox Children, the second one, there's a dwarf that is traveling with Geralt, who's a new dwarf that we haven't heard of before, not a character that has appeared in the stories, but essentially has all very similar characteristics to Yarpen Zigrin. And so it could have been easily Yarpen Zigrin, but for whatever reason it wasn't, and that sort of makes me feel like Paul Tobin was just kind of trying to create original characters that would potentially not make people angry. There's no Dandelion, for example, in the first 3 as a perfect example. However, in the third book, The Curse of Crows does have Ciri and Yennefer. So there is some of the characters from the books do start appearing later on. I think there was probably something with the first 2 and copyright issues, potentially. I'm not sure. But issue number 1, House of Glass, is actually quite an interesting story. There's a lot of mysterious back and forth going on. What is really happening? Some in-depth stuff with Geralt. There's a succubus and, a Bruxa and a grave hag and things like that. It's a very cool story. I actually quite liked it a lot, which made me think I would read them all. And that's how I started down this path anyway. But then Fox Children was also a good story, an original story. And the ending was a little bit, I don't know, it felt a little contrived. I got it. Like, it wasn't, weird, but it did feel weird for, everything leading up to that, and then suddenly there's this dramatic change right at the end. It kind of was a little disappointing. However, Curse of Crows was incredibly disappointing. I gotta say, that book, that comic had really, I didn't really know what they were going for. I don't know that Paul Tobin knew what he was going to do with that story. It just feels all over the place. There's like lots of time passing. There's lots of like things not being resolved. There was a way. The story is actually quite short and succinct when you get to its core thing. And I almost feel like there was a lot of filling of pages that were happening in that story because like when focused on the core story, it was actually pretty straightforward. But for whatever reason, there was a lot of roundy rigmarole, a lot of back and forth between Yennefer and Geralt about how to treat Ciri. And that was fine. That's sort of part of the thing. But it was like way more than there should have been, right? There could have been like a couple of panels of them arguing about something, and then, Ciri does a thing or something, and then they move on. But instead, there's like pages of like Geralt and Yennefer waiting for Ciri by a river or lake thing, but Ciri doesn't show up because Ciri's off doing some other thing, and then they have to like ride. So there's panels of them riding. And it's like there was just a lot of filler, it felt like. But anyway, getting back to it, though, when they handed the reins from Paul Tobin over to Alexander Motika, it goes right back to like being pretty succinct and pretty straightforward. And then Bartosz is actually really good at writing stories that are interesting and fun to read. I really enjoyed all of the cyberpunk ones that he did, and I definitely enjoyed book number 5. So, I have to assume book number 6 is pretty good too. The art changes as well as time passes. The art gets better. In the first one, the cover art of number 1 was the Mike Magnola, the creator of Hellboy and artist for Hellboy and stuff. And so that was actually interesting to see, but then the rest of the comic isn't that style, which is kind of like, okay, that's weird to have that person as your cover art and then not have it through the rest of the book. But the art gets better. It gets a little bit almost cartoony to some extent in the later sections in the 4 and 5. But overall, they're each individual standalone stories. So even if you haven't read the Witcher books or played the games, you could pick these up, read them, and generally get what's going on. Now, like I said, book 3 is kind of boring. And book 3, if you don't know anything about Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri, the book doesn't make any sense. Like, you have to know who these characters are to really understand why they're fighting over it. And there's a lot of references in it, for example, of Geralt and Yennefer being Ciri's parents, which we know they aren't. They're not, but they feel that way near the end of the books, especially. Because they're essentially like there's this loosey-goosiness over who a parent is in the world. Like, for example, the Geralt's mom left him. He was a child of surprise and left him to the Witchers, and Geralt doesn't really know who his dad is, and he doesn't really consider his mom that he vaguely remembers from his childhood as his parent. He just considers the Witchers that trained him his parents, like particularly the one that trained him in most of his work as his like father. And so after all of the stuff that's going on, because they're tied to Ciri and all of the things, they start to feel like they're her parents, and she considers them her parents. And so in the book, there's this argument over how to handle Ciri, and there's this like argument about them like being like Yennefer says, like, I'm her mother. So there's some deeper context to that, and if you weren't a person who'd read the books or knew what was going on, you would just assume that she was her mother, which is not the depth of which that statement makes sense to the situation when Ciri overhears them, right? So there's this whole thing about that. It like, if you have greater context, the book is a little bit better. If you have less context, then the book doesn't make any sense. So what I'm going to say then is that for them, I will give them 2 thumbs, with the caveat warning that book number 3 is less. It's a 1 thumb book. I don't want to give it 2, but so 2 thumbs for overall, 1 thumb for book 3, and so therefore I guess it gets a 1.5 thumbs in my thumb, 1 3/4 thumbs essentially. For the comics, but definitely worth like the time if you like reading graphic novels, especially ones that are standalone stories, so that you don't have to go like it doesn't finish on a cliffhanger and then you have to go buy another one. Then certainly these books are worth your money and time. They are available on in various means, including through Amazon Kindle kind of stuff, so you can read them on your Kindle. They are also at many comic shops, I discovered when I went to look for them. So yeah, you can pretty much get a hold of them. So I would say if you want to spend time reading some Witcher stories, there you go. There's some standalone stories, and they're good to go. And you don't really, aside from book 3, you don't really have to have any context as to what is going on in the world, and you can just dive right in. So, that's all I've got for you. Very good. Go read some comic books, have some fun, and tell me about it later. So I'll see you all in the future.